Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to the 11th annual LARIBA Symposium. This is a special presentation that each year we're very proud to have and to share the concepts. As you've heard the unplugged portion of the presentation, the Q&A sessions are always very popular. And we'll have the same speakers, and we're honored to have a distinguished panel today. I direct your attention to the program. We're going to make a few changes on it. Speaking first will be Mr. Keith Wright. He'll be representing Fannie Mae, followed by Imam Dr. Muhammad Adam al-Sheikh, and the third will be Professor Mahmoud al-Gamal. For Rabbi Elliot Dorff, unfortunately he could not make it, but he did send a video of his presentation. So we'll have that following the speakers. And then we'll have a Q&A session where we can all ask questions. At this time, I would like to ask Mr. Keith to come up, but as he's getting prepared, I'll give you a little bit of information about his bio. Mr. Wright is Fannie Mae's Vice President of Regional Management and Housing Partnerships. He's responsible for the operations, human resources, and business integration, technology, and budgeting for Fannie Mae. He began his career in technology in 1972 and has held technology positions at Bell Labs, Westinghouse, Nabisco, Hoffman LaRoche, and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. He's a native of New Jersey. He has held several civic and community positions, including serving as the chair of the Economic Development Corporation and the Parking Commission for the City of East Orange, New Jersey. Our New Jersey office will be happy to hear about that. He also served as the chair of the Mayor's Community Development 2000 Committee and the chairman of the YMCA and Fundraising Drive. Mr. Wright received his master's degree in general administration from the University of Maryland, a BA degree from Rutgers University, and has completed a management development program at the Harvard Business School. Without much ado, Mr. Wright.
Well, good morning. I'm pleased to be here this morning with you, and I have to confess I was really enjoying that back and forth debate about Uncle Greenspan and interest rates and renting money. So I'm sorry that we had to cut off that lively debate, but it was very interesting, so I appreciate that. Let me first say, for those of you who may not have been here last night, I really want to reiterate on behalf of Fannie Mae the gratitude and thanks to your organization, LARIBA, for honoring us. It was a wonderful thing to do, and we're very pleased to be such a good partner with you. With that, I want to get started this morning, and what I really want to do is talk about faith-based partnerships as a whole, and then our relationship that we have with LARIBA. So we'll get started. Now, I'll try to stick very close to the slides that you see up there that Paulette did so much hard work to put together, but most of the conversation will be just from the heart what we do at Fannie Mae. First of all, let me say this about faith-based partnerships. One of the things that we want to make very, very clear wherever we are in the country and whenever we're speaking, this is not an idea that was born at Fannie Mae. This is clearly something that faith-based organizations have been doing in their respective communities for a number of years. They have been supporting their folks both economically, socially, and spiritually, and we acknowledge that. This is also not something that was born by the current administration. Although our current president is very high on faith-based partnerships, it's not his idea. And so I wanted to make that very clear from the standpoint that I think it's important for us to share together that this is a learning opportunity, and we have lots of models at Fannie Mae. We have lots of partnerships at Fannie Mae, but we don't say that one is better than the other or one is applicable to everybody who's involved. And so we get excited about those opportunities to engage with you and others in this particular space. Fannie Mae, for those of you who aren't aware of our company, let me just say very clearly that with respect to housing Americans, In the mid-1930s, I'm sure Professor knows about the Great Depression that took place. Fannie Mae was actually born out of that Great Depression. And it was a simple reason why it was important to create an organization within the United States government such as Fannie Mae. And that reason was people who were actually paying on their mortgages every single month. Even during the Great Depression, they lost their homes while they were paying. And the reason why they lost their homes is because at the time they would pay so much on their homes over a period of X years, X months, and then the balloon mortgage was due at the end of a certain period. Well, during the Great Depression, when that balloon mortgage was due, there weren't any lenders for them to go out and get that financing. And so that was the creation of what we all know today as the 30-year fixed mortgage. It was actually born out of the Great Depression. And when that happened, the government looked for a company that would buy such a thing as a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, and Fannie Mae was created to do that. Well, that was in 1938. Roll the clock forward, 1968, we became a private company. 1970, Congress created Freddie Mac so that there will be competition in what is known as the secondary mortgage. And so from 1970 on to today, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have been sort of the largest participants in the secondary mortgage. What I want to share with you is what we do at Fannie Mae, our mission at Fannie Mae, and what gets our employees up each and every day. And it is a very straightforward mission. At Fannie Mae, we believe our mission is to tear down barriers, to decrease costs, and to increase housing opportunities, as well as rental opportunities for all Americans. Because we believe in doing that, it creates safer communities, it creates stronger families, and it strengthens our nation as a whole. But we also believe that there's a duality with respect to increasing home ownership. And that is, not only does it create a shelter over your head, but it also is one of the greatest ways to create wealth in the country. And in creating wealth, it's also a very powerful way to transmit wealth from one generation to the other. In fact, there was a Peruvian economist who wrote a book recently that a lot of folks at Fannie Mae had been reading called The Mystery of Capital. And what he shares in there is that, at least in the United States with respect to housing, you have that duality of purpose with your home, that you can live in it for a number of years, you can raise your children in it for a number of years, but as the wealth or the equity increases in your home, you can tap into that equity not only to send your children to college, but also to start a business or perhaps to help them start a home as well. And at Fannie Mae, we feel very, very privileged to work with institutions such as LARIBA so that we can create more and more opportunities to increase home ownership. I want to shift gears a little bit because I know we want to leave some time for question and answers, but I want to shift gears for a little bit and just move away from the slides temporarily to really talk about where we are now as an organization. At Fannie Mae a couple of years ago, in trying to move our company more and more to affordable housing company, that is to put home ownership in reach of more and more Americans, we started what we called in 1994 a $1 trillion commitment. And that commitment was basically to look at America, look at the housing opportunities in America, and to find ways to put 10 million more Americans in home over a 10-year period. So at the time we were going from, it was a 7-year period, I'm sorry, we were going from 1994 to the year 2000. We completed that a year earlier, and we immediately embarked on another commitment that we called the $2 trillion commitment. And that commitment was to put 18 million additional families in homes, and we were going to go from the year 2000 until the year 2004, and we completed that ahead of schedule. At that point in time, we were really struggling with sort of an encore because we realized that for most people, including a lot of folks at Fannie Mae, we really didn't know what $1 trillion looked like, and we certainly didn't know what $2 trillion looked like. But we did know that there were a number of folks in the country who could not afford their own homes. And in fact, there was a large housing gap in America. When you looked at white Americans as a whole, 74% of them owned their own homes and were able to tap into the equity and were able to transmit that wealth that I spoke about. But when you looked at minority communities, be it women-headed households, African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, all other folks in the United States, they were clearly below the 50% rate of home ownership. So there was a definite gap in those who could own their homes and those who did not own their homes. And Fannie Mae wanted to address that gap. And so we came to agreement amongst our colleagues throughout the country that we would then embark on this year what we call the American Dream Commitment 3.0. And it really just has three major components to it, and I think all of them would be of interest to this group here. The first component is to get more people in homes. The second component, and this goes to the heart of the conversation that they were talking earlier about foreclosure, the second component is to keep people in homes. We don't want to just put people in homes and then have to worry about foreclosing on them, but we want to find ways to keep them in homes. And then the third component is really about increasing the supply of affordable homes. Now at Fannie Mae, we're going to have a number of different initiatives to address those three components. And the one that I'd like to share with you this morning is really the faith-based component and how we believe that that can be very helpful and how we're very excited about looking for ways to increase the LARIBA model around the country, working with this fine organization so that we can put more people in homes. When we think of working with the faith-based community, again, as I said, we're not looking for a one-size-fits-all. When Colette and Donna talked about bringing this model to Fannie Mae several years ago, they really had an uphill battle inside the organization. And I'm not embarrassed to tell you, sometimes in corporate America, when you're in headquarters, we move a little bit slower than the people out in the field. So we put a lot of pressure on our folks locally to really work with you and to make us believers that this could be done. And in fact, I congratulate you, Dr. Rahman and Mike, on making us believers back in Washington, D.C., that this could actually work. But now we want to take it to a different level and figure out how we can expand this opportunity for other organizations like yours, that we can, not just do it here in Pasadena, but perhaps maybe in other states around the United States, be it Utah, be it Washington, be it Texas, wherever it might be, that we might be able to leverage this model through your help to help other folks who would like to do the same thing. I think when we think about faith-based at Fannie Mae and why this partnership is working, is because we really do have shared values. And those values are really around caring, compassion, and being connected to each other as a community. We certainly have our share of critics at Fannie Mae, and we certainly have folks who believe that perhaps there's too much housing in America. We don't agree with that. We believe that everybody who wants shelter, who wants decent housing, and who can afford decent housing ought to have it. And for those who can't afford it, we think as a community that we have a responsibility to put them in position so that they can afford it. So we don't listen to the critics when they say America is overhoused. And certainly when we think about what you have done over the last couple of years, I think it's astounding to have a community of Muslims in America who for various reasons have been renting apartments when clearly the money that they spend on renting apartments, they can own their own homes and shelter their families and have their families grow. So I think that's the sort of the undergirdings of the model that you have come up with. You're able to do something where you maintain adherence to your beliefs and to your laws. At the same time, you're able to enjoy the quality of your own home and raise your family in there. And I think that's very important. And it's something that you should really, really applaud yourselves on doing it. Let me see what is there a question? Oh. we want to talk about home ownership as it relates to local communities. And when I speak of communities, clearly LARIBA could be viewed as a community of folks. What we have found over the years is that when people invest in homes, that the whole idea of investing into a community strengthens that local community. People become more active. They become more active in their schools. They become more active in the civic associations. They become more active in local politics. And as a result, the entire community is strengthened through home ownership. We also know that through home ownership, that folks who are buying homes and folks who are raising families have figured out a way to increase the wealth for their communities. We think that's important. With the American Dream Commitment, why we want to continue that partnership and continue that growth, quite honestly, is, as I mentioned, the three parameters. One of the goals that we have underneath the American Dream Commitment is to move the home ownership gap from 46%, the minority home ownership gap, from 46%, or 49%, excuse me, to 55% in the next 10 years. Now, you might say, well, that's a nice goal to have, and, you know, we wish you well, Fannie Mae, and, you know, we'll be a part of that, help you achieving that goal. But let me share with you something that I think is very important. With all the scholars in America today, with all the people who know as much about financing homes and about the lending process, there is no one, no entity, no body anywhere in America who actually believes that the home ownership rate for minorities in the year 2014 would reach 55%. In fact, the Harvard studies suggest that the closest we might get at 55% would be 54%, and that wouldn't happen to 2020. And so when we say that we want to move it to 55% by 2014, a full 6 years before sort of the best minds in the country believe it can happen, we think that's a significant stretch for our corporation. And outlining that stretch means that we have to look to work with every body that we possibly can throughout the United States to make that happen. And that brings us here to LARIBA. If we can, in fact, take this model and jumpstart it in such a way that we can increase more opportunities for your community and like communities, that will clearly put us on the path to get to a home ownership rate just for minorities at 55%. Now, we don't say 55% to say that that's where we're going to stop. But we needed to put a goal out there that not only we could reach for, but that others could also reach for with us, because it is, in fact, a stretch for a lot of Americans. And just by show of hands in this audience here, how many of you are homeowners today? So when you just look around this room, could you just raise your hand a little bit higher? So if you look around this room here, there's opportunity in this audience here for home ownership. And when you look across America, what we found, at least with respect to minorities, that in any group setting of minority Americans, that only 1 out of 2 own their own homes. And so with that, there's a huge opportunity for us to work together to close that home ownership gap. Colette, I apologize for not going with the slides, but I just want to sort of just share with you, I think, what some of the key points are. In closing, let me just say that we were introduced to your group through the mayor of Pasadena, Mayor Bogart. I was introduced to your group through Donna Simpson and Colette. I am very excited about the work that has been done already. But I'm more excited about the opportunity that's in front of us. And what Colette and Donna have shared with you is just some literature on Fannie Mae. You know, one is really talking about what we are doing with faith-based communities across the United States. The other one is talking about tackling America's toughest housing problems. When we look at the work that we're doing in the faith-based, and we have today probably 100 faith-based partnerships. A little history about how that came about. When President Bush went to Atlanta, Georgia a couple of years ago, and he was real excited about increasing home ownership opportunities for minorities in the United States. Well, at that meeting, Fannie Mae was very involved and very active, and our chairman, Franklin Raines, came back from that meeting and said he wanted 100 faith-based partnerships over the next several years, and he wanted Fannie Mae to be out in front making those happen. And when the chairman says something, we do pay attention. One, because he is the chairman, and two, because he is very committed to housing Americans. And so when he gave the sort of edict to create these 100 faith-based partnerships, he didn't give us any parameters of what they would look like, how we would do it, who we would work with, and how quickly we would get up to 100. But I'm pleased to say that we did put some parameters around it, and what we simply said is that we wanted to work with communities that we could measure what we were doing. And measurement for us was getting people into homes. Well, shortly as we were approaching 65 partnerships just a few months ago, our chairman came back and said, I want to change that number between now and 2014 to 250 faith-based partnerships. And so we're gearing up again to figure out how we would go from the 100 that we were asked to do to the 250. And so we'll be looking for ways to make sure that we get more partnerships in the pipeline for us. But we're also going to be looking for ways that we can strengthen and deepen the current partnerships that we have. And again, I can't underscore enough the partnership that you have already created with our Western Regional Office, and it is my hope that we would take this partnership on a national level, and working with Colette and Donna and their colleagues here, and Dr. Rahman and Michael, to figure out how we can help more and more people throughout the United States who are part of your community become part of the Fannie Mae community. And so with that, I want to thank you again for having us here this morning. I will be here for a few more minutes to take a few questions. In the event that I do have to take off to get to the airport, I have two able colleagues here in Colette Porter and Donna Simpson, and they'll be happy to answer any questions if I have to leave. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. Okay. I've been instructed by Mike that I can take a few questions now. I'm happy to do so. Yes.
Please.
I think one of the great question. I think one of the biggest challenges we have is the awareness of home ownership. And what I mean by that is the awareness of the possibilities of home ownership. I can't tell you how unique and how important the work that has been done here is to our effort. Because probably 5 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago at Fannie Mae, the model that we have, there would have been a number of people inside the company who would have said, that will never work. It will never happen. And so just creating the possibility and the awareness internally, as well as what needs to happen in your community. So someone was talking earlier about, this is not marketing, but is really about communication. And it's important for us as an organization to really communicate the possibilities and the power of home ownership. Home ownership might not be for everyone. And so while we're talking about home ownership, it's also important to talk about affordable rental housing. But for those that home ownership is an opportunity, we don't want them to miss out on it only because they don't have the information and they're not aware of the possibilities. So that's a huge barrier for us. As we sit here today, we do work in Native American communities. I was in Montana last year, at the Flathead Reservation, and we're talking to their housing authority about challenges in front of them. How do they, get into home ownership? The challenges they have with sort of owning the land as a collective. Different challenges. You go into Mississippi Delta, and the stark poverty in the Mississippi Delta, and how do you deal with home ownership there? It's a challenge all across America, and so where you have the opportunity to work with organizations such as this one to really help communicate the message, that makes it a lot easier for us. Yes?
Given the fact with the lower interest rates causing the housing industry to multiply in value and quadruple sometimes in some locations, what's your take on this in the future in regards to affordable housing? How are we going to bring back the affordable housing again, given the fact that a $250,000 home at one time is now $650,000 or $800,000 in some communities?
Housing has been a sort of the strong point of the economy for a number of years. And so again, to go back to the question of awareness, for those folks who say affordable homes used to be $100,000 and now they're $250,000, and I can't afford it, those are the people who did not get into the market when it was $100,000. Those who are in the market are saying, I now have $150,000 in equity in my home. And so what we have to do as an organization is we have to figure out ways, working with the builders, working with bankers, working with local communities, and we have to build more affordable housing. And that is a collective, how do I want to say it? That is a collective opportunity for all of those who are in the housing industry. It doesn't benefit anybody to have home prices that are out of reach of the community that they want to serve. And so we have to work on that. We have to work on that at Fannie Mae. We have to work on that at the National Home Builders Association. And we have to work on that in local communities to make that possible. But to the point of higher interest rates, to the point of home ownership, I want to be very clear that because of the rising equity in homes, as I said earlier, that is probably one of the surest ways to create wealth because of that equity increase. So while we want to get more people in homes that they can afford, we don't want to say get in a home and that home will never increase in value. We do know that depending on the neighborhood, depending on the markets, depending on the people who are interested in buying, that there will be some increase in value. So we want to get people at an entry point that they can afford, and then over time they will move up.
On the subject of affordability, I heard recently that if someone cannot afford on his own income and he finds a co-borrower, you would disqualify the co-borrower if the co-borrower does not live in the property with the borrower. First, number one, is that accurate understanding of that? Number two, if so, why?
We do take co-borrowers as part of the income in the house, but I'm not sure. Donna, is it a requirement that they both live in the house?
Yes, actually, we do require the co-borrower to be living in the residence. But what I'd like to offer is sometime next week or the week after, we can sit down with Mike and go through what these other opportunities that we think are available, the low down payments, the grants, that sort of thing. And I think we could kind of talk at your level, Mike, on what the big picture is, and then be able to offer any kind of training that you think might be available. So there's some things that we can't move on, like the co-borrower issue, but I think if we get past that and look at all the other opportunities that Fannie Mae offers, I think we still would be able to help you meet those particular needs.
I want to share with you my personal experience when I moved to California. I used to be with Atlantic Richfield Company, and I used to be in a responsible position before I changed the emphasis. Everybody told me go to Rancho Palos Verdes and these expensive places. So I kept looking, and I found a nice home in Altadena. And I signed up on it, and they told me, Altadena, you're living with those people, I don't want to mention anything, but if you don't know Altadena, it's. I said, listen, we as Muslims, we are colorblind, and this is a house my wife and I were dreaming of, and it is the one that we afford. And who knows, maybe God will bless it one day. Now, we moved in the house, and many of you have been to my house, and at the time it was not very, very attractive. Now the whole area has lifted up even higher than the rest of Los Angeles. So when you look for a property, don't go with the average because you are believers in Almighty God. You go into the house that will suit you and ask God to bless it so it can be. And when you heard yesterday about It's a Wonderful Life movie, I'll be glad to share with you a copy. We have a collapsed version of the movie in 20 minutes. This is a Christmas movie that's shown in America. We took the bells and whistles and the wings of the angels out, and we made it more of an honest-to-goodness training. I wish that every time we finance a home, the representatives of LARIBA would go out and participate with you. Fannie Mae, open up these homes. But this is my advice to you, please. And by the way, there are areas in Altadena where people who are low income are selling, making a lot of money, and moving to Atlanta and Mississippi. And the young people, one of them is our stepson, has moved in. And now the home has lifted up and real nice. And that's the advice I give him. And I want to share it with you. Please do not go with the thing, oh, this is an area which is for blacks. Oh, this is an area for Latinos. Oh, this is an area for this. It is all the land of Almighty God. Go there if the house suits you. Thank you very much. I wish you a very safe trip.
Thank you.
And we're honored. Thank you.
Dr. Sheikh is the Imam of Dar al-Hijra Masjid, one of the largest and oldest mosques in the United States. It's in Virginia. He is a native of Sudan who immigrated to the United States and came over in pursuit of education. He holds a master's degree from Howard University in comparative jurisprudence. He holds a law degree. He holds a PhD from Temple University, also in comparative jurisprudence. He's a former judge and a member of the Fiqh Council, Sharia Fiqh Council. And we're very pleased to tap him from time to time to be our Sharia supervisor and advisor as well on issues of LARIBA. Without further ado, Dr. Adam Sheikh.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, I would like to thank LARIBA, this organization, and particularly my friend and brother, Dr. Yahya Abdurrahman, and brother Mike Abdul-Ati for inviting me to share with you some points about the principles of on the prohibition of the riba in Islam. Although the time might not be enough for me to go through all what I would like to say, however, I would pinpoint certain issues, and maybe we can discuss some of them at least. In Islam, we have something that is known by the rules of Islam, Ahkam al-Islam, and there are 5 rules. Those 5 rules are known as haram, which means prohibited, halal, which means lawful, mandub, which means recommendable, and makruh, which means detestable, and then mubah, which means permissible. And this point is important to understand that any activity that human being can do, it will be falling under one of these 5. No activity whatsoever, whether it's do's or don'ts, will go out, including the adults. It has to be under one of these 5 rules. And they are very limited, except the last one. The first one, the second one, and the third one, they are limited in numbers. But the last one, which is the permissible one, al-mubah, is the largest one, which, according to some scholars, it covers more than 90% of our daily activities. That is why the scholars of Islamic jurisprudence used to say, al-aslu fil ashya'i al-ibaha, the origin of everything. That is, it is permissible. That everything is permissible, unless there is the evidence from the Quran or the sound sunnah that making it haram or makruh, or this or that. Haram, this one, which is the number 2 after halal, is limited in number, but it's important to be observed. It's very important to avoid what is haram. Riba, which can be interpreted as usury or interest sometimes. That is why I prefer to use the original term of Islamic jurisprudence, or the Quranic terms, that the riba. It is one of the greatest sin in Islam, to the level that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Baqarah mentioned that you have to stop dealing with riba. Or you who believe, according to the interpretation of this ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah, or you who believe, be mindful of Allah and give away what is due to you from riba. And ittaqullah, many scholars say that fear Allah. But I would like to use be mindful, because it's not only fear. We can be fearful of Allah, but it will not give the exact understanding of ittaqu or taqwa. So be mindful of Allah and leave whatever that is due to you from riba. If you are true believers. But if you fail to do so, then be ready for a war to be waged against you by Allah and His Messenger. But if you repent, then you may retain your capital. Do not wrong anybody, and you should not be wronged. وَإِن تُبْتُمْ فَلَكُمْ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِكُمْ لَا تَظْلِمُونَ وَلَا تُظْلَمُونَ. This ayah actually is very strong prohibition involved in the ayah, and to prepare yourself to fight against God and His Messenger. It is the greatest things can be said. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, according to Sahih Muslim, a hadith narrated by Imam Muslim, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, لعن الله الربا وموكله لعن الله الربا وآكله وموكله وشاهديه, that Allah curses the one who consume usury. And not only that, also Allah curses the one who facilitate or offer such a deal of riba. And not only that, even the registrar and the two witnesses will be included in this curse. That is to make it very strong prohibition in Islam. Some hadith are mentioning that it is the first or the top of the prohibitions after the shirk, which means associating other deity with Allah. Because they said that consuming riba or involving in riba is worse than committing adultery, even by someone's doing that with his own mother. Riba, in Islam we believe, is haram and it must be avoided. And we don't believe that a time will come that people will say that, oh, this is an old fashion or old understanding, we should change it. Riba is haram until the day of judgment. That's what we believe in. And we believe that prohibition of riba is for the best interest of the community. In terms of economic developments, or social welfare, or ethical and moral parameters. That is because of the following reasons. Reason number one, that in any community that you have riba is being dealt with or prevailing, that riba system will create a class of people who the best description that to describe them that they are like parasites. They do nothing but to suck the blood of the community. All what they do is to lend money or rent money. According to our brother Yahya, renting money is haram because money is not something to be rented. And lending money with interest, we believe also it is haram as long as it is done according to the rules that are not acceptable in Islam. And that is to say, any money versus money with increment is riba. A ziyada, that any increase in the money that you gave, it is not lawful for you to take. Sometimes you may find yourself compelled to take it. And according to the jurisprudence, the Islamic rules of jurisprudence, if you cannot find a place or a house or an apartment to rent without paying the security deposit, and of course the security deposit, according to the law, they will give you your capital plus the interest. So you take that interest, but you should not use it for yourself or for your family. You give it away, and that will take the sin away from you. You will not be sinful for doing that. So you find these people are increasing in wealth. They're becoming wealthier and wealthier. And the members of the community where they live, because they are sucking the blood of the community, is becoming poorer and poorer. They earn money without producing any products or anything beneficial to the community. That is not according to the Islamic rules. If you earn That means you did something, you did some effort, and you produce some products, and you sell them, and you earn money. But what they do, they put money versus money, and they get the increment on that, which is not allowed because Islam doesn't consider money as a product, as we mentioned earlier. And considering money as a product, in fact, will lead to the disaster in the community. In Islam, Islam honored the product. And Islam considers a society where the production is being honored and encouraged. That is the healthy community. But the community which will depend on lending and charging interest, that is a sick community, and it will end up into a lot of diseases that mentioned in the fiqh and in our Islamic literature. I mentioned that riba is also against the social welfare. It is socially are not acceptable. Socially, riba as the worst thing to be found in any community, because usually the people who are seeking loan are the people who have limited income, low-class income. And because of the circumstances they live in, they have to take or they have to borrow money. And because the community failed to provide them with the alternative, which means the river-free or interest-free loan, they have no choice but to take the interest-bearing loan. And unfortunately, they do that, and knowing that they have to work harder and harder in order to meet their monthly payment. In case of large sum of loan, they have to work sometimes almost for their lifetime, such as those who are taking loan in buying houses, for instance. They work until they die or until the time of their retirement. In order to pay for the house they and their families live in. That if it was a loan which is interest-free loan, they don't have to do that. So we believe in Islam that riba is a devastating thing to be found in the community or to be promoted. And also we believe that riba creates hatred in the community. Those low-income class, when they feel that they are working day and night in order to pay the mortgage and nothing left for them to enjoy their lives, they tend to develop hatred, sometimes against the wealthiest in the community and sometimes against the community at large, because they feel that the community or the system that the community is adopting is betraying them. And that might lead sometimes into the destructive revolution. In Islam, also we believe that promoting riba is against the rules of al-qard al-hasan. And al-qard al-hasan, which is interest-free principle in Islam, it has been mentioned over and over in Islam, not only in one ayah, but it has been mentioned in different ways, al-qard al-hasan. And it has been mentioned specifically that to lend money without interest to a desperate person is like lending money to God himself. And God promised, according to the Quran, when you do that, God will not only give you 5% return, or 10%, or 17%, or 50%, He will give you more than 100%. فَيُضَاعِفَهُ لَهُ وَلَهُ أَجْرٌ كَرِيمٌ. That Allah mentioned in Surah Al-Hadid, مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يُقْرِضُ اللَّهَ قَرْضًا حَسَنًا. Who is he who will lend Allah an interest-free loan, فَيُضَاعِفَهُ لَهُ, and then Allah will double-fold it. And folding here is not multiplying only, because multiplying is different from folding. Folding means 1 plus 1 equal 2, then 2 plus 2, 4 plus 4, 8 plus 4, up to 700 times, according to the hadith, according to your intention. That is yuda'if. But multiplying can be 5 times 5, 25, and that's it. But to fold it up to 700 times, that is something huge. Some brothers try to calculate that, but they could not get, they cannot read the figure, because the figure of $1 up to 700 times is more than the budget of the United States, Japan, and the whole world. Dealing with riba will deprive us from this reward. The hadith that was quoted by Dr. Yahya earlier, that is Yahya or Mike, one of them, that mentioned that the hadith that to give $1 in qard hasan, interest-free loan, and to have it back, and to give it again, to have it back, is better than giving it for surety only one time. Because the more you give, Allah will give you fold and folds of reward in that. And the last point that I would like to mention, because my time is up, the riba, the dealing with riba, in fact, eradicates the rules of the takaful and ta'awun in the community. Thus, rules of solidarity and the cooperative, the notion of cooperative in the community, will be eradicated if we promote the deal or dealings with usury or riba. And we are losing this takaful and ta'awun in the community, and we are becoming, everything in the community is becoming materialistic kind of dealing. Not the rules or the notion of brotherhood and sisterhood in the community will be eradicated totally, and everything will be materialistic, and nothing will count except the material gains. And this is a disaster, or part of the disasters of dealing with riba. And on the top of that, Allah, when He said something it is unlawful, we should submit, because our name is Muslims, and the Muslim is the one who submit to God, whether we know the consequences, as I mentioned part of them, or we don't know. We should submit to that And I would like to stop here. If there's a question later on, inshallah, we will discuss them.
Thank you very much,
Assalamu
Dr.
alaikum.
Adam. We'll have the question and answers after the next session, inshallah. I would now like to introduce Professor Mahmoud Al-Gamal. Dr. Gamal is the chaired professor of Islamic economics, finance, and management, and professor of economics and statistics at Rice University in Houston. Dr. Al-Gamal's experience prior to Rice included teaching at the University of Rochester in New York, California Institute of Technology, California University of Wisconsin, and Madison, Wisconsin. He also worked for the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. He has written and translated a number of respected books on the topic of riba-free Islamic financing and Islamic economics, which are widely used as references. Professor Al-Gamal holds a PhD in economics from Northwestern University, an MS in statistics from Stanford, an MA and a BA in economics from the American University in Cairo. He is married and has 2 lovely sons. Please.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. What I'd like to share with you today is a little bit different, I guess, from the last presentation, in that what I've been trying to do for my own satisfaction is to try to understand what is this mixture of religion and finance. It always seemed like a strange cocktail to me, and I'm trying to figure out what exactly is going on. And I think I'm probably going to die before I figure it out, but at least I'll keep trying. And Dr. Yahya has been kind enough to keep inviting me every year. So every year, I guess I get to share with you my latest iteration, understanding what's going on. And my view right now is that basically the phenomenon of Islamic finance, as it exists today globally, is a symptom of a fundamental disease of Muslim societies. So what I want to do is go to the core of trying to understand what is really a prohibition about, and in particular the prohibition of riba, and why do we have Islamic finance now? So please, the next slide. So we start with, at the beginning, why would we have a prohibition? It's okay, thank you. Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbid something? Or if we don't want to go to religious mandated prohibitions, after all, in Hindu law and the Code of Hammurabi and so on, which were not Abrahamic, the same prohibition of riba was there. Why would you need a prohibition? Well, you would need a prohibition if you can't convince people that something is bad for them. And as all religions are paternalistic in nature, we say, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us, He knows all our faults, and He knows that if we're not forbidden from doing something, we're probably going to do it. Now, in many cases, you can just explain to somebody that don't, drown yourself, don't shoot yourself in the head. Well, that's easy to explain. But when the prohibition is so strict, as in the case of riba, I think it's precisely because people will think that this is something they would like to do, but for some reason it's bad for them. This morning I've already pointed to some of these issues, but I'll try to elaborate on them now. So it must be true that individuals, if left to their own devices, will use riba, but at the same time this is something that will hurt them in the long term. And the analogy I like to draw, and I've been thinking about more and more now, is about the analogy to the prohibition of khamr, of the imbibing of khamr. And so I went into the books of Islamic legal theory to even read about how they came to the prohibition, say, of wine or beer, when the only one that's mentioned in the Quran is khamr, which is made of dates. And they talk about the intoxicating factor and so on. It's not the redness of the drink. It's not the fact that it's a liquid, etc. But I think they missed something, because khamr is always mentioned in conjunction with maisir in Quran. It's always al-khamr wal-maisir, al-khamr wal-maisir. يسألونك عن الخمر والميسر يقول فيهما إثم كبير ومنافع للناس وإثمهما أكبر من نفعهما. And then إنما الخمر والميسر والأنصاب والأزلام رجس من عمل الشيطان. They're addictive substances. One is addictive chemically, the other is addictive psychologically, but they're addictive. They're both addictive, and that's why they're always mentioned together. It's something where once you get into it, once you get used to gambling or once you get used to wine, it's very hard to wean yourself off of it. I think riba is very much the same way, and that's why the prohibition comes gradually to wean one off that addiction. So in the prohibition of wine, it comes very briefly. First, لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى. and then of course it's completely wiped out. So you can drink, but just don't pray when you're drunk, and then eventually you say don't even come near it. The same is true with riba. At first, the first verses in Surah Al-Rum just says, well, it doesn't really multiply. Riba may look like it's multiplying in your money, but it doesn't really multiply with Allah. And then the comparison, whereas in the case of khamr, it's always khamr and maisir to show the analogy. In the case of riba, it's always contrasted with charity. وما أتيتم من ربا ليربو في أموال الناس فلا يربو عند الله وما أتيتم من زكاة تريدون وجه الله فأولئك هم المضعفون. The riba that you try to multiply your money with, that will never multiply in the eyes of Allah. But when you give charity, that is what's really multiplied. So that's not a prohibition. It just says this is not your best use of money. And then later on, in Surah Ali Imran, just don't eat it double than multiplied, which is basically Hindu law, that you can increase, but once it reaches the principle, you don't add any more interest. And then finally, ذَرُوا مَا بَقِيَ مِنَ الرِّبَى. So just give it all up. The same kind of idea as society is addicted to unlimited credit. But so we can see the parallels here. And then the prohibition is there because unlike in the case of wine, where you can live without it, so there's no reason to get onto that slippery slope, فيهما إثم كبير ومنافع للناس. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even tells us that there is benefit in this. But the sin is bigger than the benefit. So eventually avoid it completely because it's a slippery slope. Yes, a little bit may be good for you, but you get to be alcoholic and you lose it. In the case of credit, however, an economy cannot survive without credit. It is the abuse of the credit and the over-addictiveness that becomes harmful. So you have to still have it. Without the allocation of credit, there is no finance. People who are hardworking but don't have money cannot get the money of the rich. And I disagree about those people who are parasites and so on, because after all, a silent partner is doing the same thing. He has a lot of money, he just invests it, and somebody else works with it. Why credit specifically, and why this particular prohibition? So what I'm trying to do, I guess, is to understand, to my own satisfaction, hopefully, and hopefully I can help others also think about these issues, why these particular limitations were put in place, and then why what was written down in jurisprudence over the centuries, trying to understand what the forbidden riba is and how to avoid it, was really just the product of their own economics. And maybe if we try to apply our economic understanding now, we'll come up with a different story. So if I can have the next slide. What Islamic finance has become today is what I call Sharia arbitrage. Arbitrage is what you do is if you find something that sells for $5 in one place, $6 in another place, you buy it where it's cheap and sell it where it's expensive. That's called an arbitrage. In the case of Islamic finance, by the admission of the governor of the Bahrain Monetary Authority, who has been sponsoring a lot of the offshore Islamic finance all around the world now, says, look, we've grown because we can appeal to this captive market. And this is the fundamental thing about Sharia arbitrage, that some people feel, well, the only way we can participate in financial markets is if somebody uses this medieval jurisprudence to manufacture a new set of instruments. And so the captive market is necessary. Basically, to them, even an infinite price would not be too high. So, I just can't live there, period. And, and of course, if it's selling at 6% somewhere else, then I can always sell it to them at 7% or 8% and make a profit, and that would be the Sharia arbitrage. Now, if I can have the next slide. So the market is there, and everybody now is admitting finally that it's there. Now, there is a strong temptation to cater to this Sharia arbitrage. You scour the ancient books, and you find that in the ancient books they say a certain contract is forbidden, haram. For instance, an interest-bearing loan. And this is unanimous, and everybody's unanimous on this to this day. But then you find some other contracts that, with a little bit of twiddling, can do the same thing. For instance, like a murabaha, cost plus sale, or a lease. I can charge somebody a markup on the price, I can charge somebody rent, and essentially get the interest, even though it's no longer an interest-bearing loan. So what I have to do is take those old contracts and then play around with them a little bit, still maintain some noticeable difference, because otherwise I can't have the brand name. I can't sell it as Islamic and get the Sharia arbitrage. So if I can have the next slide. Thank you. So how do the mechanics work? Well, the mechanics, and you don't see this as much in the US, but think about it this way. Money for money, everybody agrees that is forbidden riba, right? Cash now for cash later with interest, that is it's an interest-bearing loan. That was forbidden at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. It will be forbidden till Yawm al-Qiyamah, as Sheikh was saying. Then, well, but what do you do? Well, you introduce property in between. So this is called bay' al-'ina. So I sell you a pencil and say, well, you have to pay me back $1.10 in a year, and then I turn around and buy it right back from you and pay you $1 now. The net result is that you got the $1 and you have to pay me $1.10 later on. And this is called bay' al-'ina, meaning the same item is sold and then resold. And this is forbidden by the text of the hadith, وَتَبَعَتُمْ بِالْعِينَ, as along other things that signal basically the decay of Islam. But even then, Imam al-Shafi'i understood it as still questionable. He said, well, what is really the forbidden bay' al-'ina is if the two sales are included in the original contract. If I say, I will buy this pencil from you and then I will turn around and sell it back, and it's all in one contract. And it's really the same prohibition as bay'ataini fi bay'a, which is another hadith. So he basically lumped it. But that's only Imam al-Shafi'i. He said, well, we can't, if they're conducted as two separate sales, we can't really judge that this is forbidden because each sale by itself is perfectly permissible. But the vast majority of the jurists, including in the Shafi'i school, don't agree with that view. His point was you can't judge on intentions. Their point is, well, it's an obvious hila, and there is a text that at least can be understood to apply to that hila. So what do they do now in the Gulf? And anywhere you go in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, you will find that they offer you something called tawarruq. They offer it in different names. They call it tamwil al-shamil in Bahrain, and they call it at-taysir in Saudi Arabia, and so on. And tawarruq says, okay, so there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that I can't take the pencil, sell it, and buy it back. What if I get a third person? So I sell it to you, and you sell it to him. Now, all of a sudden, within the Hanbali school, we find a very large number of jurists who say, oh, that's permissible. Even though some jurists obviously disagreed. Well, you can always go one more level for those who are still not satisfied. Well, let's get a fourth person. Let's, I sell it to you, you sell it to him, he sells it to a fourth person, and then I buy it from that fourth person. Basically, it's a theorem. You can always create enough camouflage to make anything into riba. And that's why I get back to the exploitation thing. If somebody is needy and you say, no, I can't lend you $100 and get 110 later on, I'll just sell you something above its price. It's so trivial to do. And that is how riba was and to not call that riba is basically playing around with the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If the intent is to exploit somebody, it's certainly riba. But riba is not only about exploitation, it's about other stuff as well. So if we can have the next slide. Okay, so here is the actual technique that they've used in the financing. And I'm showing an example particularly of murabaha because I know LARIBA doesn't use murabaha, so you can feel comfortable at least that I didn't come and eat the dinner and then condemn your model.
We used to use murabaha when we started.
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
but then we slowly graduated to a purer way. So you're not.
So, and here's how it works. So you start, okay, so we said the jurists, you find that an interest-bearing loan is forbidden, but credit sales are permissible, and credit sales with a markup are permissible. So you take murabaha and say, well, if I already owned the house and then I sold it to you at a markup, and even if you have to pay me later on, that's perfectly permissible. Well, it's a small step then to say, well, I don't actually own any homes. I'm not in the business of owning homes. You want to buy the home, so what I'll do is I'll buy it and then I'll sell it to you at a markup and you pay me over time. And then they found that was a little bit onerous. So they said, well, what I'm going to do also is I'm going to hire you as my buying agent. So you buy the house that you want to buy on my behalf. Oh, but I'd go one step further. So you're going to be my buying agent. You're also going to be my selling agent. So you go, you buy the house on my behalf, and then you sell it to yourself on my behalf. And this is halal. But the interest-bearing loan was haram. They went further, and I have a particular jurist in mind. I will name him on a different thing, but HSBC, for instance, and they publicize this, frequently asked questions about their auto financing in the Gulf. He said, well, people ask us these questions a lot, but where do you come up with the money that you're going to use for lending me? And they say, well, we're actually going to use our regular banking money that, if you came for an auto loan, we would have used the exact same money, but now we're going to use it for a Sharia-compliant transaction instead. I say, oh, interesting. So, and how much are you going to charge me? They say, well, we'll charge you the same interest rate we're going to charge those other guys as well. But ours is perfectly Islamic because we have the fatwa. So basically, it's the same money. You buy the car and then sell it to yourself. We charge you the same interest rate, but somehow this is fundamentally different. If I can have the next slide. So, and where is the difference? So Justice Taqi Osmani explains the difference here. And it's again appealing to a medieval juristic rule about what they call daman, the guarantee, which sometimes is also interpreted as risk for property. So, well, the difference is that you can't earn an income unless you bore some risk. So possessions in Islam, there are only two types of possession that jurists recognize: qabd al-amana and qabd al-daman. Either I hold it as a trust for somebody else, or I hold it with guarantee. In which case, if it's destroyed, it's my property that's lost, not the other person's. Of course, in the case of a holding of trust, it's you still have to guarantee it against your own transgression, but you don't guarantee it against an act of God. So he says, well, you see, here's the difference. Even though we're going to appoint this person to go find the car they want, buy it on our behalf, and all they have to do is basically call us on the phone and say, okay, I need $15,000 to buy it on your behalf, and we wire the money. And then he buys it on our behalf, and then he calls us again and says, now, as your selling agent, I'm going to sell it to myself. They say, well, between those two periods of time, you actually, as the bank, own the car, because the agent bought it on behalf of you, and therefore, if it was destroyed at that time before he sold it back to himself, you owned it, and that's why you are entitled to get the interest, whereas in the case, well, they wouldn't call it interest, but in the other case, you wouldn't be. So in this split second between the time you bought it on behalf of the bank and the time you sold it to yourself. Now this is, I mean, it's sadly laughable. When I show this to my students, they are rolling on the floor quite literally. And the Muslims, of course, are crying out of, I mean, if this is what we've reduced our religion to, we have a much more serious problem than anything we would have thought. So next slide, please. So what is riba really? And I don't know that we can come up with an answer, but I have my definition that I think is appropriate, and I think I've presented that in one of the earlier symposiums, and the paper is up. It gets a little involved, and that's why I tried not to go over it again. But basically, the most important thing on this slide is say, well, let's just not call it interest anymore, because there is riba without interest, and there is interest without riba. All these murabahas, all these ijaras, and so on, it's all interest-based. It's just how you determine the interest rate and the nature of the contract that changes, but they are interest-based. And any first-year MBA student will call this interest. Now, you call it implied interest, you call it what you want, rate of return, anything else, it's still interest. But we've seen, and I've said this in previous symposia, and I see the same faces year after year, so you've heard this before, that's not inappropriate. You can't call it usury, and you can't call it renting of money either, because it applies to all other commodities. And we have to remember when people say, well, money is not a commodity, money, of course, was always a commodity. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the al-Asnaf al-Sitta, the 6 commodities that are mentioned in the hadith on riba, they're all commodities. And it's not about exploitation either. Exploitation, obviously, is one of the reasons, but we can't reduce it just to exploitation. This was actually debunked 1,000 years ago by, well, a little bit later than that, but Taqiyuddin al-Subki, in his continuation of Al-Majmu' of Imam al-Nawawi in Shafi'i jurisprudence, said this is obviously not the point, because I can always effect the exploitation by just selling cows for cows. And the rules of riba don't apply there. They only apply to fungible commodities. So that's not the point. We have to look a little bit deeper. So the bottom line is any simplistic definition of riba is not going to work. If you use a simplistic definition of riba, then it's very easy to circumvent it. It's trivial to circumvent it. That is the disease we have. We want to simplify the religion, and then we want to find ways around it. And that's how we end up with Sharia arbitrage. Please, next slide. So my story, and again, I'm not going to go through it all, but my story is that basically humans are dynamically inconsistent in economic lingo, or basically they make plans and then they don't follow through. Somebody says, well, I need to go to college in order to get a good job, so I'm going to borrow money. And I go to Sally Mae and I get the loan. And then now that as soon as I graduate, I'm going to save half my income and I'm going to pay off my student loans. But as soon as I get my job, well, I have to get a nice apartment and I have to get a nice stereo and I have to get a nice car. So I'm just going to borrow a little bit more. But once I have my first promotion, I'm going to start saving 50% of my income and pay off all my student loans and my consumption loans. But then, of course, once you have your promotion, well, I need a nicer car. I need to live in a nicer area to keep up with the Joneses. And so I'm going to borrow even more. And that's how you get into the debt cycle. And so the way to stop this is to have a pre-commitment mechanism, and the pre-commitment comes through the prohibition, which doesn't say you can't have credit. I remember the Krehe once said that they believe credit is a human right or something, basic human right. And I mean, you need credit, otherwise people can never get out of a poverty trap. So you need the credit, and the problem is, how do you make sure that this credit is not abused in a way that is addictive? Now, if with alcohol you could actually give people injections, well, not alcohol, but khamr or something, just the right amount and you can never get, well, but that's not how you imbibe it. In the case of credit, well, if you cancel it completely, people will die. So the solution is to allow credit but put so many restrictions. And the restrictions, as they were understood, there's nothing about murabaha or ijara or any of the stuff in the Quran and the Sunnah. These were contracts that just existed. And so people said, well, those are the contracts. Let's just explain what the rules are for these contracts so we won't have riba. And then, of course, you take a medieval mind together with a 21st century lawyer, and you know you're going to play funny games with this stuff. You can run circles around the medieval jurist and do exactly what you want to do within his rules, right? If they could see all these tricks and understand them, they would plug all these holes as well. So, in my opinion, actually, the current regulatory framework is exactly what we have. As I said earlier, and I feel now it's my responsibility to say this, I have a conventional mortgage and I have conventional auto loans, and I feel there's nothing wrong with it. Now, I'm not a faqih and I cannot say anything, but I wouldn't see the difference. No, sure. It's just a matter of convenience for me. Yeah, but the main point is I never borrowed money. Sure. So, my point is, well, I mean, if you tell me that I never borrowed money, my banker, I'm not going to name who they are, my banker never wrote me a check and then I turned around and used that money to buy a home. They wrote the check to the builder who built my home. And then I make the payments exactly the same way. It's just a legal nicety. They never paid me money to buy my car. They paid directly the auto manufacturer, and I got the car. So I think actually that a lot of what the medieval jurisprudence was trying to do has been done in the society. It's impossible for me to go there and say, oh, lend me $1 million, $10,000. They're not going to just loan me $10,000. They want to know what I want to do with it. And if I want to buy a property, they're going to buy it on my behalf, and I'll pay them in installments. So the difference can't be on these mechanics, right? The difference has to be somewhere else. So my understanding, and I'm not a jurist, so this is not an example, and the paper is there again. I think that riba is about trading in credit. Trading in credit. So you have to create credit. We have to have finance. We have to have a system of assigning credit and transfers of credit. But what is forbidden here is to make a living off of selling credit. The problem, as I see it, so why would this be good? One of them is it will prevent over-leverage. If I can't just sell credit, I won't allow somebody to borrow indiscriminately. I'll have to say, well, what are you buying with this money? And have to make sure that there's enough equity in the property and so on. And that's why you have to have a down payment, right? Otherwise, it's infinite leverage. And it has to, and it reduces the chances of bankruptcy for the same reason. It disallows profiteering, just recognizing that people need credit, and I can give it to them in lots of ways that will be halal. I remember Avram Yudovich, who was a history professor at Princeton, when he first heard about this Islamic finance and I was taking this position, he said, just out of one book of Sarakhsi, Mabsut, I have enough tricks in order to do anything I want. And indeed, the Hanafis were notorious for writing books of, they called them Kutub al-Hayal, basically the legal stratagems to get around the prohibitions. But their point was never to actually get around the prohibition as it exists in the Quran and Sunnah. It's to get around the fine print that was written by other lawyers, by other jurists. So this is lawyers playing against lawyers. Unfortunately, I think we're using it now for profiteering. Now, why? And marking to market is only one piece of it. Marking to market is only one piece of it. It's not the whole thing. The drawback is if you don't make it a business, a for-profit business, if you make it like a credit union or a mutual bank, something that's not for profit, where basically the depositors are themselves the owners, then there won't be so much profit to go around from the Sharia arbitrage in order to hire the lawyers and hire the payroll jurists and all those, the people who basically create the tricks for the Sharia arbitrage for you. So that doesn't happen. The advantage is we already have it. We already have mutual banking. We already have credit unions. We already have various forms that can be used for actually ensuring that people don't over-leverage, that it's done the right way, and then you can add in some ethics into the mix, and then you can talk about faith-based. It's not about, you know, that we are trapped in medieval times and we have to apply rules of jurisprudence of that time. It's really, it has to be more than that. The brand name has to be more of a community-based brand name rather than a legal one, especially when the name of the game is playing legal tricks. Now, I'm not accusing anybody in this room, definitely, of doing that, but that is what the industry is about, and I find it distasteful that the industry uses the word. You don't use the word Islamic even, yeah.
You have to admit you do not play games. You know us very well.
Yeah, no, right.
The time your wife was typing the book, Larry, you know that we do not play games, we do not do hiyas. You know who that?
Yeah.
So please make that statement.
No, I'm talking about the industry. Yes. No, I mean the nice thing about operating within the U.S. regulatory framework actually is that you have I'm saying the protections that the jurists were writing about in medieval times are already there in U.S. laws. The protections are already there. You can add more protections if you want, but at least if you're obeying the laws of the land, I feel comfortable that it's Islamic to start with, and then if you add other things like being community sensitive and working with people who wouldn't have access to credit and so on, that's wonderful. But the problem is that there's a lot that's being done in the name of Islam in this Islamic finance industry that's really just pure Sharia arbitrage, just pure profiteering in the name of religion. And you know that there will be another crisis like BCCI or worse, and it will tarnish. I mean, Dr. Yahya was talking earlier about others who play fast and loose and bring in hot money from other parts of the world to buy a whole bunch of homes and then go and market them back in that part of the world. And someday somebody's going to use that for something improper, and then it's going to tarnish the whole industry's name. So I hope that Islamic finance would be more about community-based initiatives and less about the reinterpretations of medieval Sharia. Thank you.
If you take riba, which they call ribit or ribi, actually, you will see how they call it ribi or ribit in the Old Testament. If you take it, you cannot stand as a witness in the Jewish court. I don't know if you know this or not. Not only that, but in every synagogue, there is a community mutual benefit organization where they give what is similar today in our faith of the Qard Hasan. It's an amazing thing. This is not in this video, but in the other research we did. So let's listen to what Professor Dorf has.
The topic for today, namely the laws of rebate, the laws of interest, begin in the Jewish tradition in the Torah itself, where we are told that we are not allowed to oppress each other, and that one of the forms of oppression that we are not allowed to do is to charge interest to someone else in a loan. In the Torah, it's actually, the word for this is neshech, which actually means like taking a bite out of a person, because the understanding was that if you charged interest to someone else, that's effectively what you were doing. You were taking something from that person which was not proper. The Mishnaic Hebrew term for this is ribit, very similar, I understand, to the Arabic word for it, and it means taking interest, which we are not allowed to do. In the agricultural society in which the Torah was written, this was apparently fairly easy to understand, but in the more economic society, in the more monetary society in which the rabbis live, this is, I'm talking now about first century, second century, where Rome was actually ruling the world. The rabbis had to translate these laws into that kind of monetary society. And so consequently, what they did was to, on the one hand, to try to make sure that the laws of Rebbe would in fact be observed. And so they were worried about about people trying to get around them a variety of different ways, but at the same time, they themselves had to make it possible for people to engage in business. The way that they did that was by, on the one hand, strengthening the laws of Rebbe in a variety of ways, and on the other hand, making room for businesses to happen. So on the one side, when they were strengthening the laws, they tried to make sure that certain subterfuges that people were trying in order to get around the laws wouldn't work. And they even expanded it not from the monetary area to the area of interpersonal interactions, where they say, for example, that you may, of course, compliment a person for something that that person did well, but you may not compliment a person if your only intention is to try to get something from the person. That also is seen as giving interest, as it were, in this kind of interpersonal reaction with the other person. So on the one hand, they were trying to strengthen those laws, but on the other hand, they were trying to make business possible. And the way that they did that was by making room for loans and making room for businesses. In particular, the way they did it was through the idea of partnerships. That is, that if I give you money, then I cannot insist from you that you give me more money in return just by virtue of the fact that you have that money over a period of time. But if you and I go into business together, into a partnership together, then whatever the partnership earns, it earns, and whatever it loses, and the way in which those earnings or losses are shared would be dependent upon the particular arrangements of the partnership. So, for example, it may be that you and I would go into this partnership on a 50-50 basis, in which each of us would invest the same amount of money, and perhaps each of us would also work in the business, but it might be very different from that. In the extreme, it might be that you do all the work and I invest all the money, or the other way around. And similarly, in terms of the distribution of earnings and losses, that would depend very much upon the particular way in which we had set the partnership up. And that was allowed because it wasn't seen as simply my helping you. It was seen as the two of us helping each other in terms of, in order to be able to earn a living. To this day, as a result of these laws, Jewish communities have Jewish free loan societies in an attempt to try to make sure that people who need several $100s, or who need clothing, or who need food, are able to get that without interest. So that the Jewish community takes this very seriously. And also to this day, if you go into a bank in Israel, for example, that's owned by religious Jews, then you will see a notice in the bank that even if you're just taking out a checking account or an interest-bearing savings account or a certificate of deposit, that you are effectively becoming a partner in the bank for the amount of money that you're investing in the bank. And they do that in order to make sure that everybody understands that this is not supposed to be a violation of the laws of Rebbe. The interesting thing is that while these laws were in the Torah restricted to Jews, in other words, Jews were not supposed to charge other Jews interest, and the Torah really doesn't say anything about about Jews' relationships to non-Jews. By the time you get to the Mishnah and the Talmud, that's no longer the case, because even though Jews were generally not treated very well by the Romans and later the Christians, and in some cases by the Muslims, in some cases not. It depends upon what time and place you're talking about. Nevertheless, the rabbis say that Jews have to take care of the non-Jewish poor as well as the Jewish poor. and Jews have to help in the healing of non-Jews as well as in the healing of Jews, and for that matter, Jews even have to help with the burial of non-Jews as well as Jews, assuming, of course, that the non-Jews could not take care of it themselves. And so consequently, these laws of partnership and of rebate apply for Jews to non-Jews as well. They didn't originally in the Torah, but they were expanded to that during the time of the Mishnah and the Talmud. And when we're talking about Judaism, we're not talking about Judaism, the religion of the Bible. We're talking of the religion of the Bible as defined, in other words, by the rabbis. In other words, the rabbis determined what books got into the Bible, and then also as interpreted and expanded by the rabbis. So if you're asking what is the Jewish understanding of rebate, then you really have to look at not only the biblical but the rabbinic understanding of rebate. And for the rabbis, these laws would apply in the relationship of Jews to non-Jews just as much as it applies in the relationship of Jews to Jews. I hope you have a wonderful conference, and I hope that these laws help you as they help us theologically and not just economically, because these laws really are rooted in the understanding of the Jewish tradition about who we are as human beings. That is, we are human beings who are in covenant with each other and in covenant with God, and it's those very deep theological convictions that lead us to the rules in the Jewish tradition, and as I understand it in the Muslim tradition as well, that we have to take care of each other, and that part of taking care of each other as an extended family, as it were, is that we would loan money to each other without interest. In this way, both of our religions are really very different from straight capitalist theory, which would say that we are all individuals and should simply be in it for ourselves. But rather, our traditions, our religious traditions, call us to a much greater sense of concern for the other, and that concern can not just simply be a matter of emotion or of attitude, but that we actually have to live out that concern in a variety of different ways, some of them through the laws of tzedakah, the laws that are in English translates as charity, but as we understand as being justice. It's not just a matter of doing something really wonderful for somebody, something supererogatory that nobody else can really explain, can really expect of you, but rather that this is something that is expected of you. It's a matter of justice. It's a matter of tzedakah, that we take care of each other in this sort of a way. So I hope that your discussions about these laws will help you not only in terms of the economic implications of these laws, but also truthfully to better understand your own religious convictions, as well as which in this case are very much shared by the Jewish tradition. Thank you.
We've heard a lot of conflicts about what is riba, what is not riba. It seems sometimes that it's easier to say what is riba than to say what is not. How can we get around it? So in my own mind, it seems that intention is definitely number one. What is your intent? Is it to help somebody? Is it to promote an asset-based transaction, or is it simply to abuse, to get around the system, to rent money, to have passive or unreasonably let somebody else take all the risk while you sit back and enjoy the fruits of their labor and not promoting social harmony and goodwill to mankind and all that. So I'd like to open the floor for questions. Any questions? And please specify, if you wish, who you would like to address your question to.
Little clarification. The way I understood it was if I'm a tenant and I'm renting, at the end of my lease, the landlord returns the deposit back with interest. The interest portion is haram and I should give it away. That's the way I understood it. If that's the case, then how would you explain if we live in a Christian society and we get an alcoholic gift, for example, at Christmas time or birthday gifts? We can't give away what is haram, I thought, but maybe you can elaborate on that. What is haram and it should be discarded.
The point that it was referring to, what I mentioned concerning the rent of an apartment or a house, you cannot do it here under the law or local regulations of the state. unless you put a security deposit. And the security deposit will generate interest. If you live in the house more than, whatever that the term that you live, if you live 10 years, or for instance, in the house, you will get a sizable amount of money, plus, the capital that you put. Yes, according to the Islamic law, you should not use that interest. You are allowed to take your capital. فَلَكُمْ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِكُمْ لَا تَظْلِمُونَ وَلَا تُظْلَمُونَ. You are allowed to take your capital back, but the rest of it, you give it in charity. According to some scholars, even you should not expect that you will be rewarded, because that kind of money is dirty money, and Allah will not accept what is dirt, what is dirty, okay? How we compare that with the somebody will give you the gift of alcohol or something like that, which is totally haram. Well, we consider alcohol and the flesh of swine and this, what is haram, has no value in Islam. It is not muqawwam maliyan. From the jurisprudence standpoint, it is not money. It is haram, and this is something dirty, and you have to discard it. You should not give it anybody, whether Muslim or non-Muslim. Okay, but the money that you earn or were given to you from the deposit or security deposit, it is money, and you are not allowed to destroy it. You should not burn it. You give it to someone who can use it. And that is, in a nutshell, the answer for that.
I believe Professor Gamer would like to add a small comment.
Just a couple of clarifications. Again, I'm not a jurist, but based on my readings. I'll address the last point also, Sheikh Mid. It's mal غير متقوم for the Muslim when they get it, but for other things it would be treated as mal متقوم. For instance, if you destroy the wine of a Christian, you still have to pay them compensation for it. So, but as to why you can give away the money, but not, and most of the jurists say you can even give it to build the mosque or anything that's truly Islamic. And even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is good and only accepts the good, that money would still work. This is called the قاعدة فقهية, a juristic rule that was codified in مجلة الأحكام العدلية, which is the Ottoman codification of Hanafi jurisprudence, that says تغير سبب الملك قائم مقام تغير الذات. When you receive the money as interest to you, I mean, again, if you accept that is riba, then it would be forbidden by virtue of your receipt of the money in the form of interest. When you give it as charity, the recipient of that money is just receiving charity. So as far as they're concerned, that receipt, sabab al-mulk, the means by which they acquired ownership, made the money halal and good, and you can use it for any purpose. In contrast, if you're giving wine to a Muslim, obviously it's never going to be accepted, because it's intrinsically as a commodity, it's intrinsically, although actually if you keep it long enough it will become vinegar and then it's permissible again and you can sell it. But that's, I'm not trying to give you one of the old Hanafi.
Any other questions?
I know that the basic hadith of the Prophet that has been used in all the schools of thoughts was about the 6 ribawi material. I would like Dr. Mahmoud to elaborate a little bit about this, the 6 materials, and what do you think about their application these days, especially with the situation there is no gold or silver in our currency. It is just paper money. And the paper money, we know, is like a piece of rubber, can be extended in or out. And the whole thing is really need new thinking about everything we talk about riba.
Yeah, the six commodities that were mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, hadith of narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, is they were all used as monies at some point in the ancient Arabia and the neighboring areas. So he mentions gold and silver and dates and sha'ir and barley and wheat and salt and dates, and they were all used as form of money. Gold and silver obviously are Roman and Persian. Dates were used in Medina for people who were too poor to have gold or silver. Wheat and barley were used in Egypt and Iraq, and salt was used in North Africa. They were all forms of commodity monies that were divisible into the storable and divisible into reasonably homogeneous commodities. So they were all forms of money, and Imam Malik used to say, لو تعامل الناس بجلد النعم لعملت فيه الربا. If they use pieces of leather as money, I would apply the rules of riba there. And it's based on that when on the other hand, there's a long tradition also, for instance, on al-fulus, which were the copper coins, that Imam Shafi'i and others said, we don't apply the rules of riba to that because they're such small denominations, they don't really matter. But when the jurists had to decide, now that most people's wealth is in the form of this fiat money, it's even worse than fiat money. It's just numbers, sitting in a RAM or on a hard disk somewhere. If you say that those are not going to be subject to the rules of riba, then they're not going to be subject to the rules of zakat either. Sheikh Qaradawi has a very nice treatise in his book, his main book, the Fiqh al-Zakah, which was his PhD dissertation. That the root of zakah and raba are the same, means to grow, and so and he uses that to define wa'iz zakah, the properties that are eligible for zakah, as the same ones that are eligible for riba, ones that would grow. And so if you don't apply the rules of riba, you wouldn't apply the rules of zakah, and just imagine when most people's wealth is in the form that's not going to be eligible for zakah anymore. We'd have very few people actually have urud tijara and agricultural land and so on. It's all just money sitting somewhere. So that was the catch-22. Either they treat it like one of those six, which were all commodities, and even when the Hanafis applied the rules, they said, well, it's fungible properties, fungible commodities that are measurable by weight or volume. And the Malikis and Shafi'is were even more stricter. They said, well, gold and silver are universal monies, and the others are all non-perishable foodstuffs. So it's even more restricted, and you'd let people. Now, of course, again, talking about Sharia arbitrage without naming the banks, I mean that they're dealing in platinum and palladium and so on, huge amounts of riba going around the world in the name of Islamic finance, but that's another issue.
I would like just to comment briefly on the same point. Yes, gold and silver was considered money even at that time, the means for buying and selling, but the rest of the four of them is more or less is used as a barter. It's called muqayyada. And there is a difference between buying and selling using the money, cash, and using the commodities as muqayyada. So there's a difference. As a point that we mentioned that the whole thing needs to be rethought again. I agree with you that what we mentioned this morning, yes, we have to revive and we have to rewrite our legal system, our fiqh. That is needed. But we are not like the Jews, although what we heard from this rabbi, that he is encouraging his people as well as Muslims to stick with the Torah, what the Torah said. And Torah is 4,000 years plus. And when we say, Dr. Mahmoud repeatedly saying that the medieval concept of medieval fiqh, I don't want to say that I feel a little bit offended, but this is our legacy. And this is our Muslim legacy. We respect those people like Abu Hanifa, like Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad, Imam Malik, and Al-Layth, and all others. We respect them. Yes, we are not like the Christians where the Pope decide what is right and what is wrong, people follow. even if it's the death of someone, or that's what count what the Pope said. One individual, he can decide. Or we are not even like our Shia brothers, where the Imam is infallible. He can say anything and people follow him because he's infallible. We as Muslims, Sunni Muslims, we need to come together and to adapt theory and to have a collective effort on that. And it has been reported that Ali ibn Abi Talib, radiyallahu anhu, ukarramallahu wajha, he said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that later on, after you, something might come up that it's not the Quran and it's not in the Sunnah. What's your recommendation? What we should deal with it? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, do not deal with it individually. Deal with it collectively. And that's what we are trying to do, whether it is the Majma' al-Buhuth in Egypt, or the al-Buhuth in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, or even the Council of European Muslims and the Fiqh Council of the United States and Canada. That's what we are trying to do, actually, to have this collective effort in order to come up with one feasible, for rules in the fiqh, so we can adapt it. I don't agree with my friend Dr. Mahmoud that he can go to the conventional bank and do what he said he did for his house and car individually, because if everybody will do the same, then we will come to the point that there will be no ummah. There is no unity. There is no thing called Muslim community. And we will vanish one day. Shukran.
Jazakallah khair. Brother has a question?
Concept of inflation, was it back then, and any recommendation on history of Islam on that? If how would that apply with loan and things like that, like inflation?
This is actually, unfortunately, an ongoing topic that they keep studying over and over again. Of course, the history of the world in general is a history of deflation, not inflation, because just imagine technology is always improving. So if you take the exact same things, you can produce them at lower and lower prices. And so the secular trend is deflation. But even at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they did know about inflation, because there were inflations in the Roman Empire shortly before that, based on the debasing of the currency and so on. So they did know about inflation. Whether or not you should have an adjustment for inflation in a loan, I think, again, misses the point. The point of a loan, as we were saying earlier, is that it's a charitable contract. It's not, I think in one of the earlier talks, in one of the earlier LARIBA Symposia, I said that if you want to have sort of a catchy word or catchy phrase, it would be that in Islamic jurisprudence you don't borrow to do business and you don't lend to make income. Lending is just purely a charitable contribution. Basically, you're giving away the time value. If because of inflation, you're giving away even more time value, so much the better, because the whole point was this charity, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for it. So now, as for within financial contracts, if you're buying a property and financing a property, or you're leasing to purchase anything like that, where there is compensation for the time value anyway, obviously part of that will be a compensation for inflation. Another part will be the real interest rate, which is just the compensation for the time value of money. And then there will be credit risk premia and other risk premia associated with the property and the borrower. So it's there when you need compensation anyway. And where you're not supposed to ask for compensation in this world, it's not an issue. But unfortunately, many, many months are wasted in fiqh councils debating that very point.
The question is to Dr. Sheikh Adam. Talk about inflation and, the mu'akhar al-sadaq for wife, the dowry. When you don't pay it at the beginning and you want to pay it at the end, do you make the adjustment to what the value would be? In other words, is that a fatwa? Maybe this is my question, to make it short.
That's a very good question. I've been here for 20-some years, and I receive a lot of questions like, which is more or less, implying the same point. Because after the talaq, after the divorce, the mu'akhar al-sadaq, the deferred dowry is due, especially if it's this irrevocable divorce, that immediate is it. But if the dowry or the mahar was, let's say, $5,000, or for the sake of argument, let's say $1,000, in a certain country like mine, okay, when I left Sudan, the one Sudanese pound will give you $3.33. Today, $1 equals $2,060. If the mahar was $1,000, al-mu'akhar al-sadaq, should we give her its, which is a couple of cents, 50 cents or something like that. Our ijtihad, this is not actually, it is not supported collectively yet, but it is in the process, that we ask about the value of things that $1,000 can accomplish at that time, and try to give the equal amount which will do the same job today. If it is 10,000 or 100,000, whatever. That will be the hukum, and hukum ijtihadi fardi. It is an individualistic ijtihad, and it is not a collective fatwa yet.
There is a fatwa from the Fiqh Academy of the Organization of the Islamic Conference in Jeddah, which Sheikh Qaradawi and Taqi Uthmani, all those people are members of. But it's a very strange fatwa. They say, well, if the purchasing power of the debt has changed by less than 33%, one-third, then there is no compensation whatsoever. If it's above one-third, then there is full compensation, which is weird because it doesn't even mention over what time period. Overnight, 30% would be ridiculously high interest rate, and over 100 years, 30% will be nothing. But that's their fatwa, that if the purchasing power changed by more than one-third, there's a full compensation. This was issued by the Majma' al-Fiqh al-Islami 2 years ago. And I have the number of the fatwa if you want to email me.
It's very important to note that if you really go and research this, you'll find that your mahr has to be done in one of the 6 commodities. Actually, it used to be done in gold and silver. It can be called medieval rulings and stuff like that, but it is for a purpose. And it can be, yeah. And the other thing which is very important, I did a study, and I'll share it to you this afternoon on if the dollar was kept as gold, which was before August 1971 when President Nixon broke down the dollar gold relationship. You will see the impact on oil prices. As a matter of fact, today, if you were to apply the dollar as gold, do you know how much is the barrel of oil today would be? An ounce of gold should buy 2 barrels of oil. Based on that, just to answer your concern about fiat money, but bear up with me. It used to be 16 barrels of oil, actually, per ounce of gold. Now it's 2. And how much is an ounce of gold today? Approximately $400. That means the actual value of a barrel of oil, if we were not in the fiat money print basis, would have been today $200. On the contrary, you will see the impact on the housing market. On the contrary, you will see the impact on the food commodities in the world. And this is the gimmick. And I will change your mind. Believe it or not, I will.
A strong currency is a curse, not a blessing. I think you got it.
No. That's not true.
There was a reason the U.S. wanted to debase the currency.
But that's exactly what happened in Southeast Asia. But that's exactly what happened in Southeast Asia. When things didn't work out, you attack the currencies in an unethical way. If things don't work out, with that, the attacking of the currency doesn't work, we take our troops and do whatever we want to do. And that's not right. You see what I mean? That is what the Islamic essence is all about. You understand what I mean? So, you know, it's a mechanism. First of all, print money. Then, if it doesn't work, then go and destabilize currencies and economies. If it doesn't work, the last resort will be the liberation of the land and the change of governments and so on and so forth. Very unfortunate. Thank you very much. We'll talk. Oh, here it is. Here. Let me show you. This is Turkey, Mahmoud. I'm sure you know the numbers. This is Turkey, the Turkish lira. When I went to Turkey doing business for the first time in 1992, a US dollar would exchange for 108,000 Turkish liras. In January 2002, it's 1.5 million liras. The same lira and the same dollar. Now, today, it went as high as 1.9 million liras and went down now to about 1.6, 1.8. Now, this is humongous. Now, of course, the generals in the army, the affluent people, they didn't care. Because why is that? Because they don't deal in liras, they deal in US dollars. Who is impacted the most? The farmers, the workers, and the poor people. They wake up in the morning and the government tells me, no, I'm very sorry. I forgot to tell you that I printed too much money. All right? I forgot to tell you that I have been indebted for this country and that country. And I know Abdullah Tag, used to run a plant in Turkey. He used to feed his labor breakfast, lunch, and dinner because they could not get food for themselves and their families. This is the hidden story that not too many people know about. This is the hidden story. He had to give food to the people because they could not even buy a loaf of bread because they trusted that government. Look at the rest of the countries. Indonesia, currency was devalued by 77%, now it's 82%. And it goes in, actually, Egypt. At the time, 2002, it was 26%. Now, it's over 50%. Next slide, please. And here is the slide that tells it all. And of course, I am I'm an amateur researcher, not the kind of researcher Mahmoud is. And I want to really get some of your students to study these series. And I'll be glad to provide you the numbers and analyze it and so on. If the dollar stayed as gold, this is the price of a house. If the dollar stayed, went as is, which is ounce of gold per house, and you will see how it is. Keep going. That's not important. Keep going. Next slide. Where's that? And this is the gold versus rough rice. This is per ounce of gold at $35 constant, which is the red one. You can see if we were to apply the dollar as a gold today, the price of rough rice would have come up all the way, and the country would have been enjoying that change in economic environment. But today, what happens? The price, in fact, went down. And that's why a lot of people in Thailand and in other countries, they are producing all of this rice. They are still poor. And they say, well, why are we poor? We're producing all of this rice. Why are we poor? Oh, you're getting all of these dollars in your hands. But the fact of the matter is, they are being fooled. And that's unfair before Almighty God. Keep going, please. This is live cattle, the same story. Next slide, please. That's why Somalia used to be the biggest exporter of live cattle. So Somali beef, actually, is very well known in the African countries as one of the best beefs. Now they don't even have cattle anymore. Why? It doesn't make sense to raise cattle because it's not economic. Next slide. And this is what tells it all. Gold. Gold and crude oil. Actually, I have the inverse series. I'll show it to you in the afternoon. And let us, and then I'll show you also some of the rulings of Sayyidina Umar al-Khattab and so on this subject when it comes. Thank you very much.